Hey everybody, welcome to episode 48. In this episode I'm going to talk about something big that influenced me a lot in the late 80s, and it has to pertain to tabletop wargaming, specifically Warhammer 40,000. Um, so my experience with this game goes all the way back pretty much to the beginning for the most part, and I would probably say there's two instances in my life, two different time periods where I was really into Warhammer 40,000. The first one would be in 1987 when I originally learned about the game and when the Rogue Trader original book came out. I don't have that. Um, mine went a while ago. That's a really hard book to find. I've tried to get it online, and the cheapest I've seen is like maybe $80, $90 for just like a falling apart issue, and that one in particular had a tendency for the pages to pop out. So I'd like to get a good copy, and a good copy unfortunately is just way out of what I want to pay for it. It's kind of that way with like the advanced set for Marvel superheroes. Just people want too much for that. So I don't have it, so I can't show you that. I'm gonna briefly go through it because it's a big book. I'm briefly go through it to show you a couple of key things on a PDF, because I do have a PDF of it. But I guess the best thing to do would be to start with the beginning. But before that, well, yeah, let's start with the beginning. I don't want to dwell into this. You've seen this magazine before. I showed you. It's my only Dragon magazine that I still have. But this one in particular is where it started because, like I said, first of all, Joe's Hobby Shop in Rochester, right across the street from the high school there, it's pretty much where I got all my miniatures, my Dungeons and Dragons miniatures, and we started seeing these little blister packs of, well, they called them Citadel miniatures, and there was a couple of them, not a lot of them, and I was like, what are these? And they had like their own little plastic stands that you glue the other one on and put the basing on, which that was unheard of at the time. I just thought that was the newest, craziest thing I've ever seen. And the ones that in particular I was talking about were mostly from the game Warhammer Fantasy, which did come out prior to 40k. But I asked him, the guy that worked there, and the guy knew all the stuff about the miniatures and everything. He said, "Yeah, we got some catalogs and stuff. You guys want to look through them in in the big Rolodex of catalogs?" And they had a few sheets. I think even they were called Evi Metals back then. Evi Metal. Just take off the H. You got Evi Metal, or Every Metal. I can't remember what it was exactly, but they had their full color little like 2 or 3 page sheets. Usually they're just 2-page sheets, just to fold over from like an 11 by 17, folded over to an 8.5 by 11, and it's hole punched and put into this catalog. And they would get these periodically and they'd have stock numbers on them and whatnot, and they could order them. They said, yeah, they take a little longer, but our distributor has them, and it usually takes about a week, if not 2 weeks, to get these in. So we started getting a couple of them here and there to kind of supplement our Dungeons and Dragons collection, and me and my buddy from Ruther, and we were painting these things up, and we really liked them. So, and that was pretty much 1987. I would say that started like right after I started as a freshman in high school, at high school right across the street, 9th grade. So it was fall of 97. And like I said, this was an October issue. I said it before, but I'm pretty sure it was an October issue. Yeah. So of the Dragon magazine. And the thing was, I talked about this briefly, but here's where I want to get more into detail on it. So this Warhammer 40,000 ad popped up in Dragon magazine, and it just like the other one, it's the gatefold. It's the middle. Not gatefold. The middle piece here, and basically what it gave you was just give you like a brief kind of write up on the universe of Warhammer 40,000, and right off the bat, I noticed, oh, this is science fiction. This is not fantasy. And this double-page ad, like I said, I don't have a specific scan of this one, but this one in particular was the one that set it all off for me. When I saw these Space Marines, I lost my mind. And of course, when they called them Imperial Space Marines, I instantly went to, because I had just seen it recently, Aliens, the John Carpenter's Aliens, with with Ripley and Sigourney Weaver, and the Space Marines in there, and I just thought that was really cool. Space Marines. I just thought it was a neat concept. I never heard of that before. Space, Marines in space, and they were called Space Marines, and they had these powered suits, and I loved. And for the longest time, I didn't know what this blue was called, but the blue on these, I just loved that color. It was so just electric looking. It wasn't electric blue, it's ultramarine. And that's what they were eventually called. These chapter Marines were called the Ultramarines. Actually, these were the Crimson Fists later on, but then there's Ultramarines that utilize that blue. But I've never seen, even in the newest stuff, I've never seen this specific blue, so blue like that. It could have been the photograph itself, but it appears to me. And so the whole thing was a box set. The Imperial Marines box set came with 30 Marines, I believe, and they were on little sprues. They were plastic, and you could kit them together, and give them a little loadout here with different weapons and stuff. Which of course would change the stats of the models, but and then you had the space orcs, and at the time I loved orcs. I thought orcs were really cool too. I love things like green, so they had these orcs, and then you didn't get. I think you only got 20 of these. These were metal of the space orcs, and it was pretty much that was it. Space Marines versus space orcs. That's how it kind of started out with Warhammer, and. So, but they did have this thing, and they were talking about the blister packs. They came with 2 figures. I don't they have a price on them here? Yeah, $2.95. That's what they were. Joe's Hobby Shop sold them for $2.95. You got 2 metal miniatures with 2 bases. This guy, I don't know if you can see him. This guy in particular, this yellow guy here, he was the guy that really caught my eye. And I didn't know what he was. I assumed he was a Space Marine, but his armor looked different, and he had like a bunch of different characters, and the other one that really caught my eye was this guy, which of course, if everybody knows, is an Eldar, and I didn't know it at the time. That's what they were called, but I really liked the cone head things. It was really reminded me of this is before the Knights of Gondor, from Lord of the Rings came out, but it was also like a lot of the Rodney Matthews artwork for Elric always featured the Melnibonéans with these giant cone-like helmets, and I just thought that was the coolest thing too at the time. And obviously Elric being British, and Games Workshop, and Citadel Miniatures, who made these things, were British companies, so that's their inspiration. They were drawing on, because it was classic British style. Look to it. So let me skip on to, and I'll tell you my story on how I got the Rogue Trader. But before I do that, let me just pop up one thing real quick. I just got a few images here. Here's just a close-up of, it's not that specifically that ad that I just showed you, but it's close enough. It's the same image that was used in the ad, and of course I don't think they don't show the sprues in that ad, but this kind of shows you how the miniatures would come. Each sprue, you could make 2 guys, and you would give them, they're called bolters, which were their main weapons, and then you could put like a little saw blade on it. Again, that was something that blew my mind as a kid. I remember, of course, the Dreadnought from G.I. Joe. Buzzer had the chainsaw on his rifle instead of a bayonet, and I thought that was really cool. So these chainsaw type stuff on there was pretty amazing. The other thing they gave with this flamethrower. Here you could kit a guy with flamethrower, and the other one was this giant rocket launcher. You can see one of the guys up here with that giant rocket launcher, and I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And I remember being in art class first semester, Mrs. Weaver's class in Rochester High School, and I was talking to a guy who was a couple of years older than me at the time, and we were talking about military. He was a very paramilitary kind of guy, into that kind of thing, and we're talking about aliens, and I mentioned, about this chainsaw sword or chainsaw rifle thing, and so that seems to be very impractical. And I go, yeah, but it's so cool. I mean, a chainsaw and a rifle. I just remember that talking to that guy in that class, and I started bringing some of this stuff in and showing a bunch of these people at the tables, at the art tables, and they're kind of checking the stuff out too. They had never heard of any of this stuff before either, and I guess so. I wanted this box set of Marines. I wanted it very badly. And I went to Joe's, and Joe's did not have a SKU number for this yet. So their particular distributor either didn't provide them with a SKU for it, a barcode for it, or whatever I want to call it, a stock number. They just called them stock numbers back then. And they said that they probably will get it, but they haven't got the information yet. So just kind of had to wait on this one, which was, nerve-wracking. Here's the Marines box set right here, which is essentially the cover of Rogue Trader. And, I was dying to get this thing. Sorry, it never works right. Here was the orcs, just to kind of give you a comparison. And then here's also, throw this up. There's the box set for the Marines there, and then they've got a back to it too, which kind of just has that same image again, and they give you like a little, diagram. And they also give you the stats for Marines too on there, which I thought was really cool. It was very, it blew my mind also. I'm like, well, okay, you get a figure. Imagine, like, I was thinking in my head like more like an action figure, like a G.I. Joe guy. And they would give you like those file cards, or like the Transformers had their little thing that shows you like their power levels and stuff. But of course, coming really hot off of Marvel superheroes and stuff about getting a bunch of characters and getting their stats, I thought it was just ingenious to put the stats of the figures on the box. It just made perfect sense, because I mean that's all you really need to know. And they give you a little bit of fluff, Everybody who loves their role-playing games and their tabletop miniatures, they love their fluff, which is essentially just lore, talking, the story part of it. The stuff that I kind of cared about, but again, I had such an active imagination, I didn't really need to know this stuff. I made up all this stuff in my head. I remember second semester, 9th grade, I sat in Mrs. McWhirter. She was an English teacher, but she ran the computer lab, the writing lab specifically. They had these Tandy word processors down there, and I would go on lunchtime, because she let us eat our lunch in there, and I'd take my lunch in there, and I would sit there and I would write. I didn't have a computer at home. I just thought, I was sat in there and wrote like these stories about these things, and every time I saw pictures of when it inspired like a new, story that I would write down, and I'd print it all out, and put it in a folder and stuff, and I always told her I was working on a book, for this stuff, which I guess essentially it kind of sort of was. It was more just writing down all these ideas I had when I saw these miniatures. I mean, I had my own stories in my head, so I didn't need the novels, I didn't need the fluff, I had it all in my head already. Just by looking at this stuff. There was the Orc box set. I did eventually get the Orcs box set, but I got kind of late. I think I got it like 88-ish. And then I'm going to get into the Eldar here in a minute, so let me skip over, and I'll tell you. I wish I had the ad too. It's in a Dragon magazine. I don't know which one. It's got to be right around that time. I don't think it was in this one. They used to put this list of, not really like an advertisement, like an ad per se, but they used to put a list of people that would, of hobby shops and game stores, like in the whole United States by state, and, they put, sorry, that's not what I wanted to go to, there we go, they put, it was a 1-800 number, a toll-free number. This is back, when you had it cost money to call long distance, so, I didn't have cell phones back then, and, the place in particular was in California. I can't remember the name of the store was, but there was a store in there, and it said that it had Warhammer and Games Workshop products in the little blurb. in Dragon magazine. So I called a 1-800 number, on my rotary dial phone, and when we get, I got hold of the guy, and I was like, hey, I'm looking for the Warhammer 40,000 stuff. In particular, the Rogue Trader, the main rule book. I learned about that somehow, either in a magazine or an ad or something. I said, and I'm also looking for the miniatures. And he said, I got them all. And I said, really? He says, yeah. He says, what did you need? I said, well, I'm going to start with getting the Rogue Trader book, because I read the rules. He says, good idea. I said, I'm in another state. He goes, I assume so. And I said, I got your ad out of Dragon magazine, and I see it also says here you have COD, which is collect on delivery. Now, I didn't have a credit card when I was 14 years old, and my mom wasn't going to let me. My dad didn't even have a credit card, or he didn't have any active credit cards at the time. My mom would never let me use her credit cards then. So, anytime you saw COD, which is collect on delivery, literally the UPS guy would show up, knock on the door, and you had to pay the UPS guy, and then he'd get the money back to him. And usually there was no charge for that. I don't think there was a charge. I think you paid shipping, just like anything else. But I don't think there was a charge for it. And, now that I think about it, I don't think this guy was charging shipping either. So this book in particular was $19.99. I think it says $29.99 on the cover. I'm not sure. I haven't got to the cover yet. But I know it was $19.99. It was the same price as so the miniature box set was $20. The book was $20, and the Space Works were $20. And that was the only product they had that I knew of at the time. Now, I didn't realize that the blister packs actually had come out prior to the game. They were called Rogue Trader, 40,000 Rogue Trader, and they kind of started there. And then when the game came out, they kind of tied it all together, and the Eldar were out too in those blister packs, and I again didn't know about them yet. So, the guy says, yeah, I do collect on delivery. He says, yeah, and it seems like he's going to send this stuff in the mail out to some kid in another state. I guess it probably wasn't a huge cost to him, but he sent it to me COD, no shipping. And it's just like, is this kid even going to have the money? It's that type of thing. And I'll get to that. I did have the money for this, but I'll get to that in particular. So he ended up sending this book out, and it took about 2 weeks or so-ish. And I had the $20. I think it was I think he said 20 on the nose, like no change, no tax. So obviously he was, cutting into his profit a little bit to ship it and pay for tax. So I had the $20 sitting there, and I didn't want to touch it. I was really wanted to spend it on something else. I was like, this thing's coming. I gotta save the money, and it ended up coming. I remember after school one day I was sitting there, I heard a knock at the door. This was at the trailer, and it was the UPS guy, and he had this box, and he says, oh, your COD. He says, do you have the $20? And I said, yep, right here. So I gave him the $20. He gave me the box, and the rest is history, I guess. So got the box, opened it up, and I think that night, I think one of the pages ended up popping out. Like I said, this book the way it was stitched together was pretty rough. It was nice, a beautiful looking book, full hardcover, full color. There's some black and white pages, as you'll see, but most of it was full color. This glossy cover, this crazy cover you see, and I was like, okay, so tore the thing open, got into it, pulled the shrink wrap off of it, and started pouring through it, and there's a lot of some imagery that I had seen before. Like I said, there's some black and white, some color. There's the table of contents, and I kind of looked over and saw what was in the book. And then, they started talking about dice. I knew about dice. I know all the basic stuff. And it went right into combat. But all this artwork in here, I loved this artwork at the time. It was just so British looking. So 2000 AD, and just those beakhead space marines were just so iconic. I'm not yet, but they were to become iconic. But I knew there's something special at them. And this whole part about the field of battle and building scenery, again, blew my mind. I mean, obviously this stuff existed in wargaming like with historical wargaming, but I didn't really get exposed to that yet. So seeing this stuff and seeing like these little, I tried to make these so many times, and I came pretty close. These little bunkers, little huts. I talked about what the best thing to use is, like corkboard, and using the pink insulation, using the hot wire. Didn't know what a hot wire was. I mean, all this stuff I had to learn. I would go into Joe's hobby shop primarily and ask them, hey, they got what's a hot wire? Oh yeah, they sell those over in the I can't remember the train, for making train stuff. A lot of the stuff was obviously train, scenery, train diorama stuff that was used. But and again, a lot of it was asking the guys, younger guys that worked there who were, probably in their 20s at the time. And I know my one buddy, my Return of the Jedi buddy, his older brother was huge into trains, and he worked there in the train department, most of the time. And I asked, and he was into trains, so I asked him a lot. And he told me about all this stuff. It's funny because I'll give this guy, I won't say his last name, but his first name was Les, which is my buddy brother. And it's funny because he looked, when I first saw Les Claypool from Primus, it's like, God, he looks just like my buddy's brother Les, and his name's Les, short for Leslie. And and then I learned later, like the guy from, Les Claypool was all into, hobbies and radio control stuff and all that, and trains and all that stuff too. It's just kind of weird, Maybe it's not weird to you, but it was kind of weird to me, Like I said, he looked a lot like him too. Anyways, yeah. So giving them the stats, and they talked about everything, and then I saw this image here. I was like, "What? They're red ones? What are you talking about? Like red Space Marines? This guy's, oh my gosh, he's like camouflage." And I had a whole story in Mrs. McWhirter's writing lab that I wrote just about this chapter of Marines. As I started reading the book, I started realizing, I didn't read it cover to cover. Obviously, it took me forever at that time. But I was getting enough gist of just what everything was to kind of just, like I said, just little snippets. I'd pick up, like, oh, they talk about chapter of Space Marines. What's a chapter? Oh, like a chapter, a bike chapter, like a Hells Angels chapter. Oh, that's so cool. Boom, instantly, I had a whole story in my head about chapters of Marines. And, of course, they're all red, and they're called Blood Angels. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Blood and angels and Blood Angels. And it was like, what's this giant flag? What's a banner? What's a banner? Oh, like the Romans carried, or like the Nazis carried, or anything. You got those giant like war banners that a standard bearer would, because it would bear the standard of whatever force. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. That was all the stuff I started learning about, stuff that wasn't really in the Dungeons and Dragons books. And then I looked up and I saw these guys, and I instantly remembered that guy, that miniature that was in that ad in the Dragon magazine. And then it says right here, Eldar Warriors. I'm like, Eldar? What are Eldar Warriors? I'm like, oh, there's an Eldar right there. And look, he's got his helmet off. He's got a mohawk, like a green and yellow mohawk. And I loved this like dark color here with these like yellow helmets with all the black stripes. I just thought that was so just amazing. And you started seeing all these other Marines, whatever the hell that was, Zote, what the heck is this thing, or is this giant dreadnought? I was like, oh, what the heck is this? A giant Blood Angel dreadnought. It's like a giant mechanical suit. What the heck? More Eldar. This guy's always stood out to me too. I think he's in the ad too. I just thought he had like a trash can for a head. And there's a medic. What? White with that white and red and all of this stuff has just started blowing my mind. Like I said, I'm sorry to geek out so much, but I mean, like I said, just looking at it now, I just remember it takes me right back to 1987, freshman in high school, and just losing my mind. So obviously I brought this book to school with me the next day. I was showing everybody, and then my other buddy, I was on the phone already. He already knew it was coming because I was talking about it. He knew what it was too, the Ruther friend. And I started talking to him about it, and he's like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool, we got to get into that. Then they're talking about like, all the stuff that I really didn't get at the time. I didn't get a lot of this. I was like, what do you mean? I don't know, what are they shooting from in cover over woods and stuff? Because And when we played Dungeons and Dragons, we didn't really pay attention to a lot of those real, extra details. I said most of our Dungeons and Dragons playing were all theater of the mind, but we just used miniatures just because we liked the miniatures and we'd set them on the board, but we really wouldn't put them on like a map or anything or put them on a grid. We would just set them out. Here's my guy and here's the monster I'm fighting. We just put it next to each other. The rest of it was just theater of the mind. And and so I started learning about the stuff. The artwork was, again, the artwork was just blowing me away left and right. I just loved seeing it. This is just, it was so H.R. Giger too to me. There was, I don't know if you remember, there's a TV show, War of the Worlds TV show came on right about this time, and they had these the aliens in it looked like these things called necromancers. I didn't know what a necromancer was, because those weren't really in D&D that much, or if they were, I never saw them. They weren't a race or a playable class, but they might have been like an NPC or a monster. And this what's a necromancer? And like all these space navigators, and it's just like, it sounds like something from Dune. And again, it's like you got Dune here. Obviously all of this stuff, these are all influenced by Dune and 2000 AD and Judge Dredd and you just keep aliens, and it's just, all this stuff's influenced by all that stuff. But when you're a young kid like that and your brain just starts making all these connections with things, it's just, it's intoxicating. It's literally, you were high as a kite on this stuff, and anytime you saw stuff that was mentioned in something else that you liked, or like I said, like Iron Maiden singing a song about Dune, it just blew your mind. But I didn't need to take drugs back then or smoke pot. I was just I could stay in my own brain for hours, if not days and weeks, and just totally be enraptured. And then here we go. So we start seeing these Elder guys start popping up, and it's just like the detail you had to, you had to really go in and look and see like what's going on in these drawings. And again, it's going to come up here. I'm going to show you. And here we go. So we started like using whipped cream containers and spray painting them and putting them all together, and making like bunkers and different structures. It just blew my mind as well. They got into stuff with like spaceships and stuff and like flying things, but it really wasn't. There wasn't really any miniatures at the time for that, so I really kind of glossed it over. I always loved this picture of this girl holding this head here. Or this orc guy, this stuff. It's like, and it also I started very reminiscing of, especially the pictures of the orcs, of like the Gamorrean Guard drawings from that Return of the Jedi sketchbook. And like I said, all this stuff just pushed all of my buttons. Different abilities and stuff. Again, this stuff kind of was lost on me. All the real nuts and bolts of this stuff was really kind of lost on me. Oh yeah, the mutants. It's like, oh, danger, mutants. For some reason, space mutants back at that time were so cool. Whether it was on like, there's an episode of Galaxy Rangers that had space mutants, but I just thought space mutants were like so cool. Like roving bands of marauding pirate space mutants. So it's like, ugh. These guys are pretty exaggerated, pretty over the top, crazy. But just the idea of it more so than the imagery. It's just stuck in my head. Now again, I started thinking of stories of these, like I said, these like marauding, warships filled with, basically pirate ships in space, filled with space pirates that, were all mutants and mutated and had crazy mutant like stuff, and mutated aliens and half alien, half humans, and half, whatever. But, even I wasn't huge into anthropomorphic animals, but even like half animal, half human guys, and in there, it's like always it's like the color and stuff would pop, like the blues and the grays and the blacks and all those different, and lots of like neon, very cyberpunky too. Going to like planets that had like cyberpunky like cities and like outposts and stuff and all that stuff. I started seeing this stuff more and more because obviously I'm not the only one that's thought of this stuff. There's other people who've done professional things. Whether it's TV shows or movies and things like that, and they started, making a lot of this stuff. But all that stuff at that time really wasn't common. So, you know, your mind, like I said, we didn't have the internet, you know, we did have cable, but I mean, you know, if I wasn't just watching MTV or Showtime or Cinemax or watching endless wrestling, you know, endless AWA wrestling, you know, or NWA wrestling on Turner or whatever was it? What was the other one? I can't remember what the other station was. I used to watch WTBS and watch wrestling all the time. Me and my dad used to watch a lot of wrestling together. So, but yeah, I mean, this stuff is just blowing my mind. You know, again, the artwork, and then they had this little battle scenario set up to make this farm, and I did read through that, and I thought, oh, okay, I kind of understand now how this works. It's like, oh, I got to get these miniatures so I can start doing this stuff, which it didn't even hit me then, but like maybe a couple of years later, I realized in the back of the book they give you like, you could Xerox the pages and just Xerox counters and just use counters. I mean, it's not as cool, obviously, but I mean, you could just use paper counters and chits to simulate the board game, the tabletop, and just use the rules. I mean, really, that's, you know, if you're diehard into wargaming and you're not really into the hobby or you're into the aesthetics of the miniatures and stuff, really, that's all you need. I mean, you could do it all with just pieces of paper. I mean, that's what war games have been done for years. But, you know, I was a pretty crazy kid, and I wanted all the cool stuff. I loved all the weapons. So I had the weapons here. It's like, oh, this is a bolter. And so I finally read what a bolter was, what it was. You know, and the other weird guns like an auto gun, a flamer, not an LGBTQ reference, but I mean a flamethrower here. You know, and that, where was it? A melta gun. What's a melta gun? A multi-melta. A needle gun I knew because, again, Star Frontiers had a needle gun, and they mentioned needle guns in the Jerry Cornelius Chronicles, which I sort of got through. One of the Cornelius Chronicles at the time was by Michael Moorcock, the guy who wrote Blade or Stormbringer, the Elric series. So again, it's all a lot of British stuff, and you know, plasma gun. I always loved the plasma gun. I just thought it looked so cool. And where's the big King Daddy? Oh, this weird Neuro Disruptor, this alien crystal looking gun. I always thought that was really sweet. Okay, so here's the power glove. The one guy's got the giant red power glove. You know, a sword. I think they actually called them like force swords or something. But oh, there's that picture of that guy. This is that one picture that talked about the chapters. But here we go. So, you know, you're a kid. You always like, what's the biggest and baddest thing? I want to know. What's the BF and G? I want to know what it is. And you had this giant las cannon. What's a las cannon? Well, sure, for laser. I didn't know this stuff. I was a dumb kid. A heavy bolter, a heavy plasma gun, grenade launcher, and then there it was. I just thought that thing was so cool looking. It was like my favorite weapon. It's like, I just want to have just an army of guys with just these giant rocket launchers. All rocket launchers. And I won't get into this episode, but I did play, when I was playing Dawn of War, the PC game, I would always kit out all of my my squads of Space Marines with, you know, I think you could do up to 4 rocket launchers at one point once you got so far in the game. And all of them had rocket launchers, and I would have like 10 squads of Space Marines. So there's 40 rocket launchers, and it's like anytime anything came near it, it was just huge, just missiles just flying everywhere and just annihilating things quickly. It's just, oh, very cool. And again, the Dawn of War, I'm probably going to make an episode into itself of that, because that kind of, and then Battle Sector that came out, which I still have on my Steam, and I haven't played it in a while, but I'm also, there's something I want to talk about with that too. There's a few things of this that's kind of like got me scratching my head, and it's kind of annoying me. Of recent, I would say in the last few years, and I haven't got into, you know, the Eldar yet, but it deals with the Eldar, other races too, but specifically with me, it's the Eldar. Just this point of contention I've been having. Yeah, so, you know, oh, these flying Eldar guys, oh my goodness. You know, again, just the artwork. Artwork also is vaguely like, it was kind of Star Frontiers-ish, which is science fiction fantasy, and it was kind of paranoia. Had a little bit of paranoia in it. Um, I always thought that girl was so cool looking. She's holding the head there. I don't know what she's firing at. Apparently, she's just squeezing the trigger off for no apparent reason. Spiky traps and stuff, and all these different traps you can set, mines and things like that. And then I started seeing these, and they started coming more and more. These full color, full dioramas and stuff are game tables. Some of them are more dioramas than game tables because they're not really playable. But I started seeing this stuff, like this thing. What is that? Oh, then there's the image from the box set game. So, and then I started seeing these, and these things I thought were the coolest thing. Well, they're very aliens too. It's like these. They put the miniatures on like these boards with so it looked like ships, like hallways, side profiles of ships, and then they had little hallways and stuff. And I just thought that was so cool. I wanted to make a whole series of these. I also thought it was cool the very sketchy pencil drawings and stuff they had in here. Oh, then this Land Raider. I'm like, what the hell is this thing? It's like, oh my gosh, it looks like a giant World War I tank. It's a Space Marine tank called the Land Raider. And to this day, I think this is the coolest design. I'm not really a fan of the modern stuff. And I gotta say, just in general, this is a big thing for me. With Warhammer, I prefer all of this. I don't like when they started changing things, like when the Space Marines got the new helmet, I was like, what? When they started changing this, I was like, they started changing the Eldar a lot. They started changing all of this stuff, and obviously they wanted to come out with different versions and everything, but I loved all the aesthetics in this book in the original first edition, and still, it's just like Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I love what I first learned about this stuff. That's the stuff that has been, it's so ingrained in my mind that, anything that comes out afterwards, I don't like change. Once I find something that I like, especially if it hits me for the first time, especially in an impressionable age, I don't want to see change. I don't want to change, I want it to stay the exact same. They show you how the Space Marine power armor, blow apart of it. That's pretty cool. But yeah, I said I don't like things to change. I like things to stay the same. I'm a very conservative person when it comes to the things that I like. I'm not necessarily a political conservative, but when it comes to certain things, I'm very conservative. I don't want things to progress. I want things to stay the same. So yeah, we got more lore in here. And so over the time I would read, I would say the majority of this book. I never read it cover to cover, and even when I started to learn the rules, I was still picking it apart. This thing, we're talking about the Emperor. Again, another story spawned in my head. Also very H.R. Giger. And I started drawing this stuff on all my papers and notebooks and stuff, and it was just impressing people. People were like, oh my gosh, this stuff's so wild you're drawing. It was a lot of it was it was shock value too. It's just I looked at the H.R. Giger stuff, it shocked me, or some of the stuff, and I would draw the stuff, and it was just it was your way of shocking people and horrifying other people in school. It was your way of somehow what do you call it? Declaring your dominancy over people in a weird kind of way, Some kids, it's they want to be the toughest kids. Some kids are the best sports players. Some of the smartest kids. For me, it was all about drawing stuff that would shock people and, and kind of scare people and make people think that I was a little odd, so they kind of be scared of you. Which I don't know if anybody was, but I mean, I would just give off that impression. Everybody who knew me in high school thought, it's it didn't happen at the time, and I'm not saying I ever would, but it's just you've got, it's it's like the Dahmer. Watch the Dahmer thing. They talk about how weird, everybody thought he was in high school. I wasn't as good looking as him and tall and in good shape as he was, but I was definitely a little wasn't playing with a full deck, and I think most people knew that were aware of me. They were like, the guy's a little odd, you know, um, which I kind of liked. I mean, I liked that. I got off on that. I got off on scaring people, you know what I mean, and kind of intimidating people in a weird way. Not physically, because I mean, you're always in fear of getting your ass kicked. But I was always it was part of my just dealing with high school and dealing with all the pressures and stuff, was just intimidate other kids and make them think I'm crazy. I just loved that. I got off on that, you know. Um, and there we go. That was the image right there that reminded me of that episode of War of the Worlds. I said, I was reading it down here, and they talked about it was on this page. They're talking about the seers or whatever, or not the far seers, but like these navigators, like these astral navigators, and we were also necromancers and stuff like that. And it's just all that stuff. Just kind of thought was so cool, you know. And the other thing is, all this stuff looks. It's like I said, very 2080. It's very 80s. It's very indie, very punk rock. I mean, I think that's probably over. I mean, I wasn't a huge punk fan. I mean, I didn't really listen to a lot of punk bands. But I like the idea of punk, and I liked like the Mohawks, and I thought that stuff was. I like all the iconography of punk. I didn't really like the music so much. I much preferred Maiden and stuff like that, Rush, and that type of stuff. But I liked all the like the trappings of punk, and this and that's the whole like Judge Dredd and 2000 AD and all this stuff. It was very punk, very British. And I love that. It really, it just added so many different layers. I mean, I always attribute this stuff's like onions. There's just many layers. You keep peeling back and peeling back. Yeah, so that's pretty much most of the book. There's a couple of them. Oh yeah, so I started seeing the Eldars pop up everywhere, and there's one in particular. I'm trying to find it, where they had one of those dioramas. So here's the different space chapters that talked about all those. There's the Imperial Fists. What were the Imperial Fists were the main guys in the original ad, or they were the Crimson Fists? I thought they were the Crimson Fists. Flesh Eaters, Dark Angels, Flesh Terrors, White Scars. There's the Space Wolves. There's the Ultramarines. The Silver Skulls. I mean, that stuff is just so cool. I mean, it took every adolescent boy and just punched it up. Okay, here again. So, again, they're talking about Rogue Trader and, again, this very like space pirate, space thing. I think there's or rogues or whatever they call them. I think there was a set of miniatures, too. Oh, here, okay. So it's called like the Rogues or something like that, or Space Rogues. Or Space Pirates, I can't remember. On one of the magazines, one of the advertisements. So here we go. Here's one of those side-scrolling things. I think that's where that was on that other shade page. But I just loved this. They took the miniatures and made these like scenes. And there's one with the. Here we go. Here are the Eldar. One with a bridge. Oh, talks about the whole. Oh, here we go. Yeah, this one. Not a bridge. It was a ship. They had all the miniatures, and they're coming the strike boat and coming onto the land, and they're fighting all these, which are called the squats, which are the space dwarves, which kind of ended up dying out in first edition. But then there's like the blue with this yellow, and it's just like, oh god, I loved all of it. It's like I had to get I wanted these Eldar so bad. So eventually I ended up, getting them. I just like, oh, there's some legs. Eventually I ended up getting some Eldar. Again, is that like necromancery thing? Again, spawned a whole. I had a necromancer in my what do you call it? My one short story I was writing in the writing lab, and then of course I was listening to the Necromancer on Caress of Steel by Rush. Again, all this stuff hit me. I mean, I keep saying this every single time. With all this stuff, everything at that age hits you all at once, and like I said, it's just a 1-2 punch of just cool shit, and just totally, how could you possibly pay attention to school? How could you possibly pay attention to your teachers and schoolwork you know, or focus on anything, you know, that was actually make you money in life. You know, not to say, well, I mean, if you're doing this stuff, obviously you become into all this stuff, you can make money as well. But as far as like the nuts and bolts of an education, I mean, my freshman, I think my entire senior year or my entire high school, I think I graduated high school. I never failed a class, and I never got reassigned from a class, so I can say that. I never had to go to summer school. However, I got to get early dismissal at the end because I had all the credits I needed. But the thing is, my grade point average was a 1.7 when I graduated high school. Um, I just didn't. I never did my homework. I never applied myself to it. I had all of this stuff constantly going through my brain, and I didn't have any real parental, you know, control to keep me from. I was like, literally, it's like, it's not that they enabled me. I don't feel like my dad enabled me or my mom. You know, my mom, I guess, enabled me by neglect. Essentially, you know, she was out doing she was working and, like I said, doing her own thing and not paying attention to anything that I'm doing for the most part. Once and when she did once in a while, and she just I don't know. Me and my mom didn't get along very well, and my dad, on the other hand, you know, he same thing. He was kind of like he was just happy that I wasn't in trouble, you know, and he liked me being there. And I didn't really necessarily enable me, but I guess he just, as a parent, you know, he just kind of, he indulged me in whatever craziness that I wanted to do. It's kind of what I do with my son, and yeah, with no real lack of, with no parental like not supervision, but like I guess just parenting to make you pay attention to school and get through it and do all that stuff. And like I said, I wasn't smart. I couldn't do math very well. I could do math okay, but I wasn't very high in math. I could barely read. You know, although I wanted books all the time with words in them, but I couldn't read very well, which is weird. You know, books that I thought were more complicated than reading any kind of science book or history book, and a lot more, you know, interesting. But again, struggling to read this stuff too. You know, I think they tried at certain points to intervene, like counseling and special education. Obviously, did. But the problem with special education, I found, was they identified the issue. There was an issue, right? Which is fine. That's good. They pulled you out of your mainstream classes. But then they just threw you into basically just glorified detention, is all it was. That's what I considered it. It's just, they put you in a small classroom with a bunch of other delinquents, you know, which are all just, you know, burnouts and dropouts and deadheads and you know, high-ons and, you know, the dregs of high school, you know what I mean? Basically the, you know, the basket of deplorables. They put you in this classroom with this, you know, and they really wouldn't, and they sort of kind of half teach you the subjects, you know, and not make them hard or challenging, not really give you homework, you know, and make things as easy, dumb it down as possible. And that's their way of getting you through high school. They didn't, I should make a whole video on special education, my issues with it. You know, I'm not a specialist and I didn't go to school for teach special education, but I knew growing up and going through the system that what I really needed was a lot of parenting, pretty much, and which, you know, schools, I guess, are not prepared to do or not going to do. But more so than that, academically, I needed help academically. And my biggest thing was reading, and it didn't seem like anybody really spent any time or did anything about helping me read stuff. It's like you could sit there and assign me chapters to read in books all day long, but if I can't read the book, it's kind of pointless. You know, and like I said, I mean, it's not that I was neglecting my homework to read this stuff. I couldn't understand this stuff either very much. I was more interested in reading this stuff, and this stuff kept my attention a lot more than, say, you know, a high school textbook. But I had trouble. I couldn't, like I said, I love that drawing right there. I couldn't read this stuff very well, so I couldn't play. And so, again, one of the byproducts of this was I spent most of the time when first edition Warhammer 40,000 was out not playing the game much. I bought a lot of miniatures, painted a lot of miniatures, made just played with them like toys, and looked at a lot of, and drew a lot of pictures, and wrote a lot of stories, and thought about it a lot. But as far as actually playing the game, I think we played maybe a handful of times throughout high school, and we didn't really play it correctly. I remember when I first played Warhammer for the first time right by people, a bunch of engineers that I used to hang out with, and they're smart. They could figure out all this stuff. They, they basically just told me what to do. I didn't have to read anything. They just told, here are the rules. This is what you do, right? And I was like, oh, this is what the game's like playing it. And we're talking 2003. So when I got back into it, 2003. And I was also in college at the time, so I was better at reading. And yeah, what do you call it? I was just like, so this is what the game's about. And that kind of made me think, I'm going to have to do this in a two-part episode, because I'm not even anywhere near talking about the Eldar yet. I guess this will just be the first book, the Rogue Trader book. That's what I'll title this one. Sorry about flipping the pages like that, but I just want to show you more of the art. Well, it's just, you could just make an art book. You could just have a book with just the artwork. You don't have to put one word in it. You don't even have to give it a title. You don't have to call it Warhammer 40. It could just be a picture book. And I could spend hours looking at the artwork and making all of the stories up in my head. You don't need to tell me what chapter of you don't need to call them Space Marine. Call them chapters. You don't need to tell me what a necromancer is. Tell me. I mean, I like those words. They sound cool. But I mean, you didn't have to tell me any of that stuff. I could have figured it all out in my own head. I always see these guys playing the games too, and it's like, I had dreams of daydreams of sitting around playing the game with people, that like-minded people that got, and having fun. I saw these pictures of these people having fun playing the game, and I wanted to be part of that too. And when I eventually got into it, I started doing that. I had fun, but at the same time also, it turned me off to it. Actually, sitting around and watching people play the game, somebody, when Magic the Gathering came out, they mentioned this, and I totally agree. I mean, it echoed exactly what I was thinking in my head. Was somebody asked this guy, said, "Hey, you into Magic the Gathering?" Some other guy at a store, and the other guy's like going, when it first came out, I looked at it, and I really thought it was cool. I bought some cards, and I started collecting it, and so I really like to play the game up until I saw people playing the game. And and started experiencing people playing the game, and I realized I don't like this game, and these people turned me off to the game. I'm the exact same way. This was kind of, I started going to game stores and playing with gamers and stuff, and it made me not like the stuff anymore. It's just like, a lot of the people are weirder than me. I thought I was weird. It's weird when you're in a group of people and you think you're an absolute lunatic, and you get there and you're like, I seem extremely normal compared to all these people. A lot of dudes, again, and I liked hanging out with dudes, but at a certain point, it's like where are all the girls? Girls don't like any of this stuff, And I started to learn all that stuff the hard way when I was young. My teenage years is girls don't like any of this stuff. So it was really hard. It's like, but I want to hang out with the girls. I don't want to hang out with a bunch of dudes. But none of the girls want to do any of this stuff or play any of this stuff. They want to do other stuff that I don't want to do. And I started realizing right off the bat, this is going to be an issue in life. Well, what do I do about it, And like a lot of us do, we figure it out as we go, make a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes. I just like this. This is what we're kind of... This also reminded me very of... Justice League International too. with all the facial expressions and stuff and all this stuff. I just like that. I think these are all like the creators all done up, like as mutants or crazy characters, and I just thought that was cool too. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I'm talking, but I thought that was cool. It was okay. So and then they got it in here. Then all the rule stuff. Now here they go. I mean, I understood what that was, and when they talked about these characters, and they give the stats and everything, but I didn't realize at the back they gave like this. It's like, oh, so that's what you do. You just cut them out. You make a copy of these, cut them out, and use these as the miniatures, and then you make up your unit record sheets and fill in all the stuff. What you're going to kit out, whether you're putting Marines or or heavy weapons guys or whatever. And essentially, there's the miniature advertisement more. And then of course Warhammer Fantasy, but that's the book. And I haven't even got into my story of buying the miniatures yet. So I guess, yeah, the Warhammer is more to it than I guess, we can do in an hour. So I guess we'll just start. This is my introduction to Warhammer and 40,000 and and Rogue Trader. We'll do the miniatures. Talk about the miniatures later. I wish I could get the miniatures. I wish I could. Again, I had a whole thing I want to talk about as far as the miniatures and the Eldar and stuff and these guys, like I said, the beakhead guys. So, yeah, it's definitely have to be a multi-parter. So, we're coming up on an hour, so I'm going to close this out with this. I just want to show you a couple of things real quick. So, one key issue of this is my only White Dwarf that I own, so that I've gotten rid of all my old White Dwarfs. But this one was, essentially it was the Eldar Codex. This is before they called them Codex. This is from 1990, and this gave you basically all of the Eldar units, and they gave you their stats and the fluff. It's got the lore in there, everything. And a lot of people consider this issue to be the first Eldar, the Dark Reapers. The first, what do you call it? Eldar Codex. So I've got that issue, if I want to point that out. Now, these... Oh, sorry, I did have two other White Dwarfs. I forgot. I've got the ones... You've probably seen these before, too. But these are the two of the covers. This was the cover, and I've got the book over there. But this was the cover of the Codex for 3rd edition Warhammer, and all that craziness. Oh, I love it. And then there's the Craft Worlds and Eldar. It's got those books, and then there's the actual codex. It's funny, look how thin the codex is. Now the codexes are like $80 books, and this is chock filled with a bunch of crap. It's like you didn't need all that. Literally, the fluff was like an introduction, Craft Worlds, fluff, like 3 pages of fluff, and then it's just rules, stats, and then awesome pictures of really cool miniatures. I said I have to make a video on just this version in my Eldar army because I've got stuff to talk about on that too. And then they've got stuff on the psychic, in your heroes, on the weapons, a little bit on the the displacement of the Eldar, on the Craft World ships, which there was an actual book called Craft Worlds that had more lore in it. But again, that's it. And that's all you needed then. Now, game's gotten I've gotten issues with all that stuff. I mean, I understand the biggest problem with all of the things that I like is corporatism. Corporatism seems to be destroying everything. And that seems to be, it is. I mean, corporatism and corporate greed is destroying everything that you can. It's like a juggernaut. I mean, it's like I just imagine it like as in like the Big Nothing from Never-Ending Story. It was just this force that just, like a nuclear explosion, just wipes out everything that's beautiful. That's what corporate greed does. And I'm not saying I'm saying that's a bad thing. I mean it's a terrible thing, yeah. But I mean it's not like it's not anybody's fault per se. It's just I can't blame one corporation. I can't blame one CEO or a company You know, I blame the concept of corporatism, and I blame humans. I mean, that's pretty much everything to blame about it. And there's no one specific person. So obviously, I can't, you can't let it drive you completely crazy. But I feel that corporatism is destroying. It just lays waste to everything in its path. Trying to use some Warhammer type wargaming analogies here to make it more flowery, but to give it some more fluff. So yeah, that's pretty much my experience with Warhammer. Like I said, I've known about it since '87, and it's been in recesses of my mind for the last 30 some years. Almost 40 years. And and I relive it in my head periodically here and there. But there's only two pocket areas where I spent a couple of years with it. Into it pretty heavily. Again, I still like the stuff today. Still like looking at the stuff, and even the new stuff comes out which I don't like. I still look at it, periodically, just because I just want to see if there's something new. Like I said, I'll get into stuff about the action figures too. It's one of my points of contention with those too. But that's another video, another day. So it's been an hour, so let's rein it in. If you like this, subscribe, start conversations, do all that business, and I will catch you tomorrow. All right, talk to you later. Bye-bye.